Greetings viewers, if you click the video link, you're here to learn how to take apart and reassemble your Tavor 7. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So in my previous Tavor SAR-21 disassembly video, I used the Tav tool from Shooting Sight. And unfortunately not all of the things that are on here work specifically for this weapon, as this weapon was made and designed and built after this was completed. However, the barrel unlock tool that is on here is still applicable. That is still the same size and the same system that's used on doing that. But other than that, we're just going to need a couple Allen wrenches. So basically, if you are familiar at all with any of the Tavors and how to disassemble them, we're going to go ahead and start out just the same. So we're going to take some sort of punch tool, and we've got this pin right here on the rear that needs to be pushed. It is a captured pin, so it will not come all the way out. So once we do that, it automatically springs open on its own because it's under spring tension from the buffer spring. So we're just going to go ahead and pull out the entire bolt assembly here. And it looks just like this. So we'll set that aside for just a second. I am going to close this flap back up just so that this pin doesn't get in the way and start banging into stuff. And we're going to take the trigger pack out now. So in order to do that, it's the same thing. We just need to push these two pins here. We're going to push it all the way until it clicks. And again, I'm just using an Allen wrench for this. You can use any sort of punch tool that you can put enough force on to go ahead and push those out. They're not going to fall right out, so you're going to put a little bit of tension on them. So I wouldn't suggest using something wimpy and plastic. So the trigger pack is just going to drop out just like this. Do not, under any circumstances, disassemble or take anything apart on this. Don't mess with the mechanism so that the hammer slams forward, because it can cause damage to the trigger pack. Leave it just like it is, and we're going to set this aside. So we've got the weapon out of the way. We are going to go ahead and disassemble our bolt assembly here. So for starters, there's an arrow here showing us this little pin. So similar setup, we need to push that pin out so we can get access to the inner mechanism here. All right, so we're just going to push that pin out just like we did all the other ones. Again, it is captured, so that's going to stay put. We're going to go ahead and pull the firing pin out of the back. It should come with a little spring attached to it. If not, make sure you grab that out of there once you remove the firing pin. We're going to flip this over now. And if we look on the top here, you should see this little pin that's got an L and an R on it. It's kind of a little teardrop shape. We need to lift that out of there. All right, so we can just turn this upside down. A little pin with the L and the R on top of it is just going to fall out, so we're going to set that aside. Now we can go ahead and pull the entire bolt out of the front. So the extractor on this thing is put in with a roll pin, so do not attempt to take that out. Just leave it as is and clean this, or do whatever it is. The reason you're taking this out to, whether you're polishing it, cleaning it, whatever you're doing, just leave it in this final form here. Don't mess with that any further. Same thing with this. Just leave everything in here the way that it is. Everything that we took out, super simple. They made the breakdown of this way easier and sort of similar to an AR. A little bit better than the Tavor SAR-21 model. I'm not quite sure completely about the X95 because I do not own one of those and I've not disassembled one. So again, now we can just go ahead and set this aside. Our bolt assembly is completely disassembled. Again, we are not going to do anything with this trigger pack. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the piston apart. In order to do that, we need to take the position where it is right now. It's on normal, so the big hole is on the left side of the weapon. It is parallel to the ground. We need to rotate it one direction this way. So the other gas settings on here are in this direction, so normally you would rotate it that way. So what we need to do is we need to rotate it the opposite direction. So we're going to put our tool in here. It is a little tight. And we're just going to pivot it down. I'm going to switch to the other side since I'm running out of room for rotation there, and we're going to turn it until you hear a click. And this whole assembly is going to pop out. So we're going to have access to our piston now to clean that. So we're just going to tilt the gun this way, give it a little shake, and our piston rod's going to actually come out. It should have a spring on it, so make sure that comes out with it. Inside of here, if we can separate these two pieces so we can go ahead and clean inside of there. That's going to be completely gunked up and disgusting once you're finished shooting, especially depending on what ammo you're using. So as of right now, that is all that you need to do for basic disassembly, maintenance, and cleaning of your weapon. You're going to have to try and do your best, just like an AR, to get in here and try and clean that chamber out. It is fairly wide open since this is a 308, so they give you plenty of space to work with. So go ahead and get that cleaned out. get access to everything in here that you can. Open up the back flap and clean around in there as well. Clean the magazine well, and anything that you can reach in here. Don't forget your bore snake or cleaning rod and the muzzle, and then cleaning down inside here for the piston assembly. So again, that concludes the basic maintenance and breakdown. So everything I'm gonna do from this step forward is gonna be a little bit more advanced. There's a reason that you were going this in depth. In my specific instance, I am gonna be replacing parts, and I'm gonna show you how everything goes back together. The stuff that I'm taking off basically reassembles just the same as it would the stock configuration. So again, from this point forward, none of the stuff I'm about to do is necessary unless you are doing something specific like changing out your barrel or taking it apart to get the barrel out and do an annual or semi-annual deep cleaning. I am going to be replacing it with some non-stock parts. They are going to go together the same as the stock parts would, and I'll make sure to explain how all of that's going to happen. So we're going to do a couple of things first here. We are going to take off this top rail, and in order to do that, we need to remove 4 different screws. So there are 2 screws right here on the top, and then there are 2 screws, one here and one opposite. These 2 screws are basically together. So one of them is kind of hollow and screws in from one side, and the other one goes inside of it. So they kind of cinch each other tight and hold all of this together. So we do have to remove those 2 at the same time. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my Allen wrench and take this top one off. There's no washers or anything that comes with this. There's no Loctite on it, so we're going to set these aside. So these Allen screws are the same size. Again, we do need to take them off at the same time. So I've got both of my Allen wrenches here. One's going to go one way, one's going to go the other. This one's going to get stopped by the charging handle, so we'll just spin the other one and keep turning until it comes out. So you can see this one is kind of long and hollowed out and threaded on the inside. This one is a lot shorter and threaded on the outside, so they screw together. We're going to put these aside, try not to lose them. So now the top rail will just pull off. It just lifts right off, and you can set it aside. We need to take the forend off next, but we do have to take one more step before we can do that. The same Allen wrench that you use to take off the top rail is the same one that goes in the bottom of the grip here. There's a single Allen screw that we need to take off. You don't need to take it completely off. We just need to loosen it enough that the grip pulls away from the gun, and I'll show you why in a second. So now we've loosened enough that the grip actually pulls away, and then we can pivot it. So if you notice, there is a notch right here, and there's a corresponding peg that goes into that notch there. That has to be undone in order to slide the forend off, as well as that screw has to come out because it does hold the forend on from the inside. So this should just pull right off the front. We have to unclip the charging handle from it. The mechanism that locks it in place does grab onto the forend, so we just grab this and it pulls right off the front. You're going to have to wiggle it a little bit to get it over the gas block assembly, and our forend is removed. All right, so next we can remove the charging handle. These pieces are now kind of flapping around because there are slots on the forend here. There's these little pointy pegs on either side that lock into the front of this to help hold it in place. So right now this is all flapping around. So you can just take your charging handle and slide it forward, kind of peel those out of the way, and just kind of wiggle that out the best that you can. So now our charging handle is removed, and the only thing we have left to do is take the barrel out of this thing. All right, so in order to remove the barrel, if you are again familiar with the Tavor weapons, it's the same. If not, I'm going to explain it. So we've got this little kind of flappy piece right here. There seems to be a lot of flappy pieces on the Tavor, or at least that's what I call them. So there is a hole in here, and when we push on the area of that hole, this little flipper kind of springs out. So you can see that popping up. And what that does is that gets that thing out of the way. We've got to push that hard enough that it clears that the plastic edge there, because on this side we need to put our barrel wrench in that little slot. Make sure you are using the appropriate tool for this. Do not try and wedge a flat screwdriver in there or any other tool that's not designed for this, especially if it's something you intend to do more than once ever in the lifetime of the weapon. You don't want to wear that piece out or break it or ruin something and then you can't get it off or on when you need to. So use the proper tool for this. Spend the money, wait a little bit of time, be patient, and get your hands on it. Again, the Tav tool does come with a barrel wrench. So again, if you have more than one Tavor, definitely handy. Rather than having one little loose tool around, it just flips out, and that's the piece that we're gonna need. And we slot it into this position. Obviously, you can see it says locked and unlocked, so we're gonna rotate it from the bottom. We're gonna turn it down until until this white line is over here on unlocked, and then our barrel should pull free. So again, this is a little difficult to demonstrate being able to show both sides. So again, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be pushing this little piece down simultaneously. Once that's far enough out of the way, I'm going to be turning this piece over here to get the barrel free. All right, so I've turned it enough that the piece has come out of the hole there and it's now on top of the plastic. I don't need to keep pressing anymore unless you're just trying to keep it from wallering out the plastic there, because that part is metal, so it will scratch the plastic a little bit. All right, so I just keep turning my barrel wrench. I don't need to hold that little flap out of the way anymore. The white line is now in the unlocked position and my barrel just slides completely free of the weapon, giving you complete access to the chamber. How easy is that to clean instead of reaching in there with 500 Q-tips trying to clean it out? And again, you have access to the full barrel for whatever, again, your purpose is of taking this out. If you're putting a longer, shorter barrel in it, anyway, whatever reason you're taking your barrel off, that's how it's done. So then now, again, you have complete access to the inner workings of the weapon from this side as well, so you can get down in here and clean anything that you need access to. Also, while you have this open, if you're interested, you can actually see the mechanisms in there for how the magazine release works, as well as the safety and the trigger. So make sure you clean all those parts really well. And that is it for the full disassembly. So now we are going to need to get back into putting this thing back together. Again, I am going to do so with parts that are not the same factory ones we took off. However, the process is exactly the same, and I will be sure to explain that as we go through. All right, so now that we are done disassembling this thing as far as we can, it's time to put it back together, and we are going to start by going basically in a reverse order, and we are going to put the barrel back in this thing. So make sure all of your piston assembly pieces are up, and all we're going to do, you can see the big round hole, and that's where our big round area for our chamber is going to go. We're just going to slide it right on in until it won't go any further. And you're going to notice a little bit of play in it, but once we lock the barrel back in, we won't have any issues with that. So when we're locking the barrel back, we don't have to worry about that piece on the other side because it's already lifted out of that gap. The only time that applies is once it's locked. So when we flip this over to the locked position, it will click into place and then it will have to be depressed again to be opened back up. So all we have to do now that our barrel is back in, make sure that it is pressed all the way to the rear as far as it will go. We're going to put our barrel tool in, and then we're just going to rotate the opposite direction we rotated to unlock it. And then once we rotate it back in place, the white line should be lined up with the locked position, and our little tab that flips out has locked back down into its position. So our barrel is now reinstalled in the weapon, and we can put our charging handle in. And so the charging handle does have a indicator on here that says up, so this side needs to be up when you're installing it. It will fold into a forward position. This may make it a little bit easier for you to get it in and out of the weapon. Just make sure that the up side is correct. Otherwise, if you're putting it in wrong, you're going to have a bad day. So make sure that that's done. We're going to peel this out of the way and kind of finagle it in here. We can now rotate our charging handle so it's in the up position. And it slides freely where it's supposed to. So now that we've got our charging handle back in, it's time to reinstall our Forend. So make sure that the end that has all this funny business is pointed towards the weapon. All we're going to do is we're going to slip it over the end of the barrel and then slide it all the way down. You may need to give it a little bit of motivation. And so you have to be very careful when we're reassembling this portion. Like I said, there are these two little spikes right here and right here. And they interface with the ends of these two parts right here, and they're on the opposite side in the exact same location. So when you slide these together, you need to make sure that all of this lines up exactly on this side and this side so that these pieces can now not flip around like when we peeled them apart to do the charging handle. So those are all locked up. This is all nice and flush, and we need to push it back on. Now, The first thing we can do after getting that on there to help keep it secured in place is go ahead and retighten our grip. So we're just going to grab the Allen wrench for that and make sure that this front portion of the grip is lined up in the notch there, and we're just going to tighten it down until it closes up. I don't know that there's any specific torque settings for this, but just make sure it's nice and tight because you don't want your grip coming loose and wobbling around while you're shooting. So just hand tight, don't put a breaker bar on it and torque it down any more than hand tight. So the next thing that we need to do is put the top rail on. However, as I mentioned, I am swapping out some parts on this. So this is the stock top rail here, and it's very short, which requires you to kind of put your head really close down to the weapon to look down your sights or your optic. So I am replacing it with a Manticore Arms raised rail, and this kind of essentially brings it up to AR height, an AR height rail, so I'm not having to squish my head and neck down onto the gun. It is identical in its installation, so all the screws and holes or everything are in the same place. The part itself is just a little bit different looking. So what we need to do is we need to find those two screws we had earlier, with the long skinny one that's threaded on the inside and then the small one that's threaded on the outside that made up, because we're going to need to put them through that hole. So all we're going to do is we're just going to place the rail on top. You're looking for this hole right here, and it's going to match up with that. So again, that's just going to squeeze down on there. You may have to kind of finagle it a little bit to get this pin in there, because you've got a whole bunch of pieces that have to line up exactly, and the holes may be kind of weird, so you may have to squish it, you might have to wiggle it a little bit, twist this around, flip it over and look from the other side until it pops all the way in. So now we're lined up. I can drop my screw in from the other side here. Just go ahead and get it started by hand, but at some point the other side's going to start spinning freely. Put an Allen wrench again on both sides. Again, no specific torque specs for this. Just make it tight, not so tight that you snap your Allen wrench or strip the head out. Just nice and tight. So now our forend is reassembled. When we slide our charging handle forward, it should lock again into this little spot here. So just test it, make sure that you've got everything lined up. There's no gaps here, everything is flush, and we're all set there. We need to put the two screws back in the top now. I was mistaken. There are two little silver washer things that were in there. They didn't initially come out, and I couldn't see them until I cleaned everything up, but they're actually two double stacked washers. So make sure you have those. So we're going to go ahead and take the screws that came out of the top to begin with. We're going to put those washers directly onto them to make it easier to get them back in. So we've got those back on, and then we're just going to drop them down in the hole. And then again, same Allen wrench that we used for our grip and these screws previously to disassemble. We're just going to go ahead and screw these both down. I'll just get that one snug and then switch to the front one and snug it down. I'm not going to torque them just yet. All right, and then once they're both tight, I'll come back and we'll just make them hand tight again. Don't try and break anything tightening this stuff down. Channeling your inner He-Man. Once those are nice and tight, your rail's secure, everything's locked up. All right, so now we are going to reinstall the piston system. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take the long rod here, and we are going to go through where the gas piston is, and we're going to kind of wiggle that through till it finds its hole. Those little pieces that were on top of the barrel, that's where it needs to index down. So that's going to just go in as far as you can push it. It'll get itself worked in the rest of the way. So next we're going to take the actual piston itself. The bigger part here, it has the gas rings. That's going to go inside of this tube here for your selector, your setting selector here for your piston. So that's going to go in there. It's going to be a little bit of a tight fit. It's designed to be that way. You're going to push it in as far as it'll go. And then now we're going to bring this back up to the front of the weapon here. So it's going to be kind of a reverse order here again. So you've got this cutout down here, and you've got this portion right here that has no teeth. So if you look at the front, this kind of flat spot right here, there is raised edges here. So this needs to line up with that when you slide it in. So again, you may have to wiggle it a little bit. There is going to be some spring tension, so if you let go of it, it's going to push back out. So we need to go from here and we are going to rotate it. Remember, we went one this way past normal, so we need to rotate it from here this way. So we're, as you are looking at it, going counterclockwise, because right now the large hole on our selector is pointing down and we need it to be parallel with the ground. So we're going to put our tool in there and we're just going to click it back one setting this way. So we push it in as far as it'll go, it'll click, and then we rotate it until it clicks into place, and now we are back into the normal firing position. So at this point we are almost done. We just need to reassemble the bolt. So let's get this out of the way and start working on that. All right, so we are going to reassemble our bolt, and this is the time where I am going to show you how to convert this bolt portion of the weapon to either right or left hand. Now, this is the actual bolt for the weapon. Right above the firing pin, retaining pin hole here, there is an R that is stamped into the metal, and if we flip this over to the opposite side, there is an L. So when we put this weapon together, this rubber portion is towards the rear of the weapon. It's going to sit in the gun like this. The spring will be at the top. The bolt portion that's down here will be down below. Or if I orient this pointing towards the camera here, this way is the muzzle of the gun, and the bolt goes in. I need to be looking down at the letter. So as I'm holding the gun to shoot, I see R looking at me. That means this is for right hand. If I'm wanting to assemble this in a left hand configuration, I need to flip it over until I am looking at the L. Also, if you are mechanically inclined, you would notice where the ejectors, plural, and the extractor are. If we're shooting left-handed, we want the brass going out the left side of the weapon, so it would be hooking and pulling it that way while this side is simultaneously pushing. I am assembling this back into right-hand mode because I am a right-handed shooter. However, that is the very first step that you need to take in order to convert this weapon to the opposite hand. So pay attention to looking at your letters, otherwise your gun's not going to go back together properly. So I'm looking at an R, that's what I want to see. I'm going to fit my bolt in. Again, I can see the R down below through the top of this portion here. Now, I'm going to leave that oriented with that hole. And the next thing I'm going to look at is this pin that's got this teardrop shape. Stamped on the top of that is an L and an R, but they are backwards from each other. So as you're looking at it right now, the R should be right side up, and then when I flip it, now the L is right side up. So this is the same thing we're going to do as we did with the bolt. So right now, while I'm looking at it, this pin is going to go straight down into that hole. So again, the bolt is sitting like this with the R facing up. I need to be able to look at this and see the R in the correct orientation, which means this little teardrop tip piece is pointing forward. And that's going to drop down inside of the bolt basically, and it's going to hold it in place. So it should look like that. For a right-handed shooter, if I am shooting or converting it to left hand, I would flip this so that I'm looking at the L. This would be turned so that as I'm looking at it, the L is properly aligned, and then it goes down in the hole that way. All right, so back to where we were. Bolt, I'm assembling it in right-hand shooter mode, so the R should be pointing up. Finagle it in there, get it to this point right here. Take my pin, I need the teardrop pointing forward so that I'm looking at the R. Drop it down in that hole I just showed you. Push it all the way down till it goes all the way in. You can see it moving around down there. And then we just take our firing pin, make sure that your spring is attached to it. And we are going to drop it down the back side of this hole. Make sure that this pin is pulled out to its full extension so that way it's not blocking you from dropping this in there. And then once the firing pin is in place, go ahead and squish that pin all the way down until it clicks. That's going to keep your firing pin from falling out of the back. And our bolt is now reassembled. All right, so now it's time to reinstall our bolt in the weapon. If you had pushed this pin back in place like I did, just to keep the pin from getting annoying and snagging on everything, you're going to have to push that back out. Again, it should be captured. It should not get lost. Pull it until it clicks. This should allow you to flip the door open. All right, so now once that door is flapped open, we are just going to take this. So we're just going to insert it in the back here. Gonna have to finagle it a little bit. This is going to be sticking out the back. You're not going to get that to close until this is actually pushing on it and shuts it. I'm going to leave that for just a second because there is something that I'm going to do differently. However, right now we're going to go ahead and reinstall our trigger pack. So if you need to know the orientation of which way it's going to go, look at these holes here, they will line up because one is lower than the other. So if you try and put it this way, the holes would have to be like that to line up, and that's not going to work. This is the hammer here that falls this direction, so it needs to be installed this way. So we've got to push these two pins back out again. And once those two pins are out, we need to pull this down and back far enough that it will allow us to slide our trigger pack back in. You may have to kind of wiggle it and finagle it a little bit. It should just go right into place. This will go right down over it, and then push the pins back through. Again, you might have to wiggle it a little bit to get all these holes to line up and orient properly. But then those pins will pop back into their normal position. This is working as intended there. So we need to do something with the end of the gun here. All right, so at this point, theoretically, we are done. The only thing you need to do is flip this door up, pop that pin in place, and the weapon is completely reassembled, and we do a function check. However, bonus material here, I am replacing this butt pad, and I want to go ahead and do that as part of this video. The current one that comes stock on this is a very thin piece of hard plastic, as you can hear. This is a 308 ramming into my shoulder. I'd like a little bit of comfort if possible, so I am replacing it with this Manticore Arms curved butt pad. This is significantly thicker than the stock one, so that is going to increase the overall length, obviously not by much, and it's going to increase the length of pull, but it is a squishy rubber, and it is curved rather than just completely 90 degrees straight, so hopefully this should provide a little bit more comfort when shooting this weapon. So in order to change this out, there is a flathead screw on this side right here, and there's also one on the opposite side. So much like the double screw situation we had up here to get the top rail off where they mate together, one from each side, we have to do the exact same thing here, but with flathead screws instead of hex heads. All right, so we are going to put a flathead screwdriver on one side, we are going to put a flathead screwdriver on the other, and we are going to turn them until they separate. Now that screw came out. Again, same situation, threaded on the inside, threaded on the outside. They mate together. So now this butt pad just peels right off, and all we do is replace it with the new one. So we just pop that back into place where the other one came out. We take our long internally threaded screw, and we have to slide that all the way through again. Just like before, you have a lot of holes to go through, so you may have to finagle it. It went straight through. We're just going to put this one in now. I'm going to hold this with my finger until it starts fighting me and spinning on its own. All right, once I get that screwed all the way down and start turning it and I can feel the resistance on my finger, I'm going to go ahead and get my second flathead, get it in a position where I can hold it, and then I'm just going to tighten this down. Not going to overdo it, just nice and tight. We're going to pull this pin out. We need to close our butt pad. Put our pin back in. And our weapon is now fully assembled. So once you've function checked your weapon and you're satisfied that everything is back together the way you wanted it, whether you were converting it to left hand, whether you were doing a barrel swap, you were just doing a nice deep clean, hopefully you found this video useful in your endeavors. If you have any questions regarding anything I may not have covered, please feel free to let me know in the comments down below, and I'll be glad to answer them as soon as possible. So with that, again, hopefully you found this video useful. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.